Afternoon. Come on, we can do better than that. Good afternoon. All right, I know it's after lunch. Today's topic is Lean Six Sigma in a supply chain environment. My name is Mark Waddleton. I am the current Vice President of ISM Houston affiliate, and next year I will be ascending to the presidency, so it will be mostly on my shoulders in order to deliver content like this with the help of about 30 board members. So I certainly could not do it alone, but we certainly appreciate the audience that we have today and you all spending some time out of your demanding schedules to join us on this topic. So I'd like to start with one of my favorite individuals, Albert Einstein. He said, "We cannot solve problems with the same thinking we use to create those problems." So this is kind of the basis of Lean Six Sigma. So what is Lean Six Sigma? It is a combination of lean manufacturing, enterprise philosophies with the Six Sigma methods and tools to eliminate waste of physical, time, effort, and talent resources while assuring quality and organizational and production processes. Yeah, that's a mouthful. Essentially, there were lean concepts, and then there were Six Sigma concepts, and they came together because they dovetail quite well with each other. So the father of the Toyota production system, Taiichi Ohno. I like these two quotes. One, progress cannot be generated when we are satisfied with the existing situation. In other words, shorthand, keep doing the same thing, expecting different results. Anybody heard that before? And then the other thing that I liked about the second quote is, costs do not exist to be calculated. Costs exist to be reduced. Think about that. You know, in all of the processes, not only here at McDermott, within other organizations, or even when you're out, you know, in your personal lives, whether it's at home or you're having a retail experience, there are costs layered in. And sometimes we run right up against those. You can see them sometimes. Executive sponsorship of a Lean Six Sigma program is key. It starts there. So quality depends on good data. It also depends on executive leadership and how they use that data. So executive leadership and sponsorship of any Lean Six Sigma project, it has to be sponsored by them, because that is the first step in the organization getting behind any or several of those efforts depending on where they are. So let's start with the context. So if you look at McDermott or any business organization, you've got top-line strategy. It's how you're going to compete. Then you've got structure, you've got people and culture, and then you've got systems. I like to say this is how you execute. This is how you execute your daily work. So from a strategy standpoint, look, there are all these sort of forces. In business school, they call them Michael Porter's 5 forces. So, you know, you've got the bargaining power of your buyers. You've got the bargaining power of your suppliers. You've got the threat of new entrants, and then you've got the threat of substitutes, and those are all shaping the context of how your competition competes with each other. So like in the retail sector, for example, Walmart. Walmart is a large buyer. They basically set their prices. If you want to sell through them, you have to guarantee a certain amount of volume to them at a certain price. Now, that could put a small business out of business quickly if they're unable to do that. So that's just an example of many. Then what I call systems. Look, how efficient are these individual interactions? Inputs, the environment. So you've got political, social, technology, environmental. You've got resources, whether that's asset resources, human resources, or fiscal resources. You've got the history of the firm. All of those play into the strategy. So then you map out a strategy, and then the work gets done. So how do you do the work? You've got the formal organizations. Everybody in here reports to somebody. Then you've got the informal networks along with that. And then, of course, you've got the key piece, which is the people. Nothing gets done without the people. And then on the back end, it's, hey, how does McDermott or any other organization show up with the competition? Then you've got your unit. In this case, Ricardo leads the supply chain organization. It could be finance. It could be human resources. And then, of course, you drill down a little bit further, you get to the individual. Then you have structure, right? Typically, this is a very basic look at supply chain. You've got some sort of vendors, then you've got the company that is turning something into value-added products, and then you have how they deliver that to market, and then you have the customers or the end market user. So it doesn't necessarily mean that your customer is the ultimate end market user. You know, how is the firm organized to deliver the right product to the right place at the right time? That's what we all work towards. How do we deliver that? That comes from the structure. Another part of this is, how do you do your product delivery? So you can have build to order, assemble to order, build to stock, and engineer to order. Where does McDermott fall in those? You engineer to order. But I guarantee you there are bits and pieces of each one of those, even though McDermott engineers to order, there are bits and pieces of your suppliers that do a combination of the above. Now, if you think in build to order, it's basically products built in response to an actual customer's order. So you go in, you place an order, think of Dell. You know, if you're ordering a Dell computer online, you know, they're building it for your order. You decide on the chip, the type of software you want, camera, etc. Then you've got assemble to order. So sub-assemblies are produced according to a forecast. And then you've got build to stock. Think of Walmart again, right? They have a they probably have a combination of a push-pull strategy. They build some and then they pull it through depending on what they're trying to execute on, and the category as well. Then you've got people and culture. So implementing a continuous improvement program requires significant change management efforts. What I like to say is project management for people. So some of those are, hey, look, if we're going to change a given process, it's a good idea to identify who those thought leaders and those opinion leaders are. That also sits in the informal organization, because we all know that, hey, and I'm making this up, John, you really have to get John on board in order to move this forward, because he might be the subject matter expert in this. As an example, build small wins, especially when you're putting a new team together. In the past, when I've done this work, I have found I try from a project management standpoint to build the confidence, and that builds small wins. So we'll do something where we can see results within a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month. All right, we cheer. Next hill to climb. And so that you build that cohesion within that team. Communicate, communicate, communicate. I can't state this enough. By the time I get tired of saying X, that's about the time that it takes hold. So even though you might be tired, and don't start off with, like I said before, what you do is you just share that knowledge, share that information over and over and over again, and at some point it will light itself on fire. I've seen it multiple times, but it takes that level of persistence. Be prepared to adjust, because as you move through a Lean Six Sigma program, you're making adjustments on any given process, you're going to learn things that are going to require you to change and adjust. Again, it kind of goes back to people, culture, systems, and structure. A lot of that is already baked in. There's only so much that you can do about it. You're not probably going to be in a position to relocate this physical location to somewhere else to make it easier for one of your customers. So you have to work within those constraints. And then I'd also like to think that you need to get human resources involved, because as you're moving through a change program, there are going to be training and development needs. So it's almost part of the communication. Tell them what you're getting ready to do it, and then tell them what you've done. And train over and over and over again. There will be some individuals that will be right with you, and that's where your opinion leaders and your thought leaders come from. It's important to get them on board as soon as you can, so that they can be sort of the trainers, if you will. Lastly, on this slide, institutional memory is powerful. So one of the most important steps when you're going through a Lean Six Sigma program is that you need to have what I call the sustain phase. Oftentimes what that means is whatever those old tools were that caused you to eliminate them, you've got to get rid of them. And then oftentimes you have to go back 3 months later, 6 months later to see if the new process has stuck. And if it hasn't, why? Because again, institutional memory is very powerful. Do not underestimate the ability to move, for the organization to begin to move or migrate back to its old habits. That's not why you're going through the process of a Lean Six Sigma project. Lean Six Sigma is a journey. So on this slide, you'll see it's walk, run, ride. So at the bottom level, which is where we're going to spend most of our time today, is, look, you're trying to create a solid foundation. General Electric, GE, does this by making sure all of their employees have gone through their internal Greenbelt program. So when they are confronted with a new project around Lean or Six Sigma, they're already familiar with the tools and the language. So you've got to start there, and then you can move up to what they call a world-class organization. It's only a handful of those in my view. Toyota being one, because they've been doing this for such a long time. Now, Toyota has also had their hiccups as well. A few years back, they went from the largest car manufacturer in the world to, I think, number 2 or number 3. And GM and Ford overtook them because they had some quality issues. So somehow the Kool-Aid that they were drinking, they had to go back and make a fresh batch, if you will. So in each one of those stages, you start with structured, you move to manage. You really don't really get to some of the tools around Six Sigma because it's very statistical in nature until you get to predictable and capable. And then, of course, you get to world class at some point. But it is a journey. And oftentimes these journeys take years. And again, that is why it takes executive leadership to be involved and to drive that and also provide resources. Because at times, if you are doing your day job and you're also doing a Lean Six Sigma project of any given shape or form, you're going to need some flexibility there. System optimization. So anytime a barrier is crossed, there's a chance for error. Anytime a barrier is crossed, there is a chance for error. What does this mean? It means every time, if I'm in supply chain and I need to go make a hire, that's a barrier. That's a gap. There's an opportunity for error. Just kind of depends on what that error might be, but there's an opportunity for error. So you typically start there because I have found in the past that that is where the low-hanging fruit is. Those oftentimes are the easy opportunities. How do we make that as seamless as possible? Supply chain and finance, finance and manufacturing. They're all types of barriers. And it just means a gap. It doesn't mean that anybody's preventing others from doing their work. It just means that there's a gap. So, when it comes to the lean part of Six Sigma, there are 8 ways. And I like to think of it in the acronym TRIMWOOD. So there's transportation, there's skills, which is the actual R, so call it resources. There is inventory, there's waiting, there's overproduction, there's overprocessing, and then there is defects. TRIMWOOD. So as an example, transportation. That could be anybody store their kitchen knives in their bathroom? No, that's excessive transportation. You need to have them where you can use them. Overproducing. Just think about the fact that sometimes, and I've done it until I went through my training, I used to make extra copies just to have extra copies. But now, look, if there are 10 people supposed to be in a meeting, I make 10 copies. I don't overproduce. Overprocessing. How many of you all have customers that want to pay for the Cadillac but want the Ferrari? Especially as an engineer to order organization. Inventory. Inventory, I've found, generally has a lot of cash opportunities to find. There was a firm that I dealt with, and their employees were the ones that showered after work, and what they end up doing is they had a lot of inventory and billets and steel laying around on the ground. Well, those employees associated their job security with how much inventory was sitting on the ground. But the executives, when they went through a lean program, discovered, hey, that inventory that's sitting on the ground, that's cash. That's cash that's sitting there. That's cash that I can deploy somewhere else in the organization. And there are certain models that you can do. There are descriptive models for inventory. There are prescriptive models that you can do, assuming that you've got the fidelity of the data. And that's the key. A lot of this pivots on having fidelity of information. So those are just a few of the examples of the 8 ways. Certainly, underutilization of individuals. You may have more capacity, right? I can do more. Let me do more. So here's some different examples of waste in different sectors. So as you can see, manufacturing, defect shows up in rework, scrap, and poor quality. Overproduction, unclear, excessive production. Even in supply chain management, excessive warehousing. That's overproduction, as an example. Defects, missing wrong supplies. Get down here to motion, difficult government approvals. We've all experienced that in one way, shape, form, or another. So here's some tools to get started, and this is, I tried to pitch this as what you could take from here and walk out and apply in your current roles as you see them. So 5S. 5S is a very powerful tool that I've used over and over again, really just to get the ball started, to get people to understand what the Lean Six Sigma process is about. So it starts off with sort, then you set, then you shine, then you standardize, and then you sustain. You actually go through each one of those, and I'll show you some pictures a little bit later. And then the other powerful one that I like to use is the 5 whys. Somebody comes to your office and say, hey, you know, I had this issue. Why? Have them explain. Why? Usually about the third why, third or fourth why, things begin to fall apart, right? Either you get to the core of the root cause, or you find out that that individual has to go back and do some additional legwork. But it's a very, very powerful tool. And for those of you all with children, you can use it with your children, right? You can say, why? Why'd you do that? Ask 5 whys. So here's some examples of 5S. You know, in the right hand picture, you see, hey, they just got tools shoved into a drawer. In the left hand, they've actually got carve-outs. In the picture below, you see a very messy office. Now you see what a very 5S office looks like. There are very easy ways to implement this. There's a book called the Checklist Manifesto, and it really talks about some of their 5S processes, right? For those of us who have heard people getting sewn up with scalpels and medical equipment inside them, that's what the Checklist Manifesto is about. They actually came out with carve-outs, and the doctor and the nurse would check, hey, do we have everything? What did we start with? And after he sews the person up or gets ready to sew the person up, they check, okay, do we have everything that we started with? Because if we don't, we can't sew this person up. We've got to go find that implement, whatever it might be. So don't leave here thinking that this is only a manufacturing deal. It can be applied amongst any field. One of my more exciting projects was doing a Lean Six Sigma Kaizen event in human resources. Talk about measuring, right? Yes. So we had to find ways to measure. We had to find ways that we could show demonstrated improvement. So some other methods to apply. So DMAIC, and I'll talk about that in the following slide. There's Design for Six Sigma. There's change management, which I've already mentioned. And then there's project management, which you already do. You do, I imagine, a quite good job at project management. Again, change management is essentially project management for people. And then Design for Six Sigma builds on the DMAIC process. What is DMAIC? It's define, measure, analyze, improve, control, and I would add sustain. Because you can do all of the other 5, and if you don't sustain it, those gains that you got will slowly erode. And you don't want that to happen. Because oftentimes there have been significant resources put into gaining that advantage. The setup is the key. So where do you want to focus? First of all, you want to focus on building the project, and this is all in the define stage. You want to focus on the project charter. What are we trying to solve for? It's all in the question. So for example, Deming asked, because he's sort of a father of Lean Six Sigma as you talk about industrial processes, Deming asked, how long does it take X person to assemble Y equipment? He didn't ask, how long does it take Susan to assemble it? How long does it take Tony to assemble it? Because Tony could do it in 2 hours and Susan could do it in an hour and a half. He asked, how long does it take? So it's setting up the question. Everything begins, I'll back up. Then you have to do process. So you have to do, there's a lot of mapping. You have to do a current state map. What does the process look like now? What do we want the process to look like in the future? You do a SIPOC, which stands for suppliers input, processes output, and customers. And then you always have to have a customer orientation. I'll dig into that a little bit later. So every process starts with a signal of need. You get hungry? Yeah, that's a signal of need. Then you have constraints. Can I leave? Do I want to go to McDonald's, or do I want to sit down at Chili's? So you have to understand what those constraints are. Begin with the end in mind. So start with the voice of the customer. Understand this is an in-depth process. The voice of the customer is an in-depth process of capturing the customer's expectations, preferences, and aversions. Why do you want to do that? Well, look, you want to identify what they call critical to quality, or CTXs. Critical to delivery, critical to quality, and critical to safety. Because guess what? Your customer will only wants to pay for the value-added pieces of it, but they don't want to pay for your internal wasteful activities or things typically required to go ongoing business. For example, hiring is a part of your ongoing business, but you're not going to likely convince your customer to pay for you to hire individuals. It will be baked in. Some other things, some other key definitions. There's accuracy, which is the measurement of how close a value comes to the true value. There's precision, which is how close the values are to each other. There's stability, which is the process that maintains measurement of how the process maintains performance over time. There's gauge repeatability, which is the ability of an operator or an individual to consistently repeat the same measurement of the same part using the same gauge under the same conditions. And then there's gauge reproducibility, which is essentially you take different people and see do they come up with the same quantitative analysis, okay? So is your process and controller capable? This is not only out of control, it is not capable. It is not precise, and it is not accurate. Now this is precise, but it's not accurate. Where would it be if it was accurate? I guess that's not the bullseye. Now this is accurate, but it's not necessarily precise. And then of course, that's where you want to be. So typically on a Lean Six Sigma project, you'll discover what are the outer control limits, and you also want to set your limits just on the inside of that. So in case, because sometimes, look, if you're machining something, your tools wear down. But if you have set your control limits appropriately, then you've got an opportunity you can still sell that product, but then you've got an opportunity to go in and retool those, or get sharper tools, if you will. Here's the impacts of waste. Like the iceberg. There's a lot of stuff hanging up under the ocean that you don't see. Rework, product failures, brand impact. Yeah, remember what happened to Toyota, GM for that matter? They took a huge hit for a $5 part. Essentially, that's what it boiled down to, a $5 part. And they apparently knew about it. Remember, taking a systems approach, so improving the performance of a subsystem does not necessarily mean that you improve the system as a whole. So a local optimum does not equate to a global optimum. Yes, I did use calculus on that. Why is that? Bottlenecks move. As soon as you fix one problem, that bottleneck has gone somewhere else. You may not know what it is, but you should always be on the lookout for it. It will change. Now, the secondary decision is, hey, can the entire system maintain wherever that bottleneck moved? Sometimes you can map it out, especially if you're talking about cells and machining processes. Then there's the not invented here syndrome. So focus on the customer needs and the process considerations when designing your firm's product delivery system. At the end of the day, half of creativity is observing what somebody else does and using it in your case, in your application. Try and always benchmark best practices. So develop performance metrics, but then go benchmark and see who's world class in that particular area. Supplier development, P&G is Procter & Gamble, one of the best when it comes to supplier development. Every time they sit down at the table, they're having a conversation of how do we develop our suppliers and bring them in. Don't let this be you when it comes to continuous improvement. Didn't help, okay? So working with your suppliers, it is essential that internal processes are stable, otherwise you look like this to your suppliers. You know, you go out and say, hey, we want to see these improvements, and they can't peg where they need to be. So one thing that I like to do is and you can do this simultaneously as you're working on your internal process to improve, hey, repeat that have that conversation very early on with your suppliers. We're improving this, so these are our learnings. Take a look at your systems. This is what we would like to see. And here's some other thoughts. So as a firm improves, expect the existing business arrangements to be viewed much differently. You're going to find stuff. Sort of like finding coins in your couch, right? And you'll view that differently. So when you're reaching out to your suppliers, map their supply chain end to end. And end to end means you're on one end and you start with their raw materials. Develop supplier KPIs that you can manage. You don't need 100 KPIs. Start with 3 or 4 that actually move the needle. Everything rolls up through there. Be thoughtful about it. Visual management. Have it to where it can be seen. What gets measured gets done. Eliminate waste wherever possible. Try and minimize both transaction and production costs. That means that you're a true partner with your suppliers. Establish a collaborative supplier development relationship. You know, you still want to maintain some competition, but you can be cooperative in that process. Ensure visibility and transparency while fostering knowledge sharing. You have to share information at the appropriate level in order to help your suppliers get better. And then, of course, align core competencies and complementary capabilities. It's okay to say, we're not good at this. Let's find somebody else who's better at it. So what I'll do is I'll take a couple of questions. I'm more than happy to stay afterwards and take additional questions, but I want to leave enough time for Leandra to share her portion. So does anybody have any questions of me